Hello, I'm Rob Bork, Professor of Art History at the University of Iowa. I'm a specialist in the study of medieval art and architecture, with a particular passion for great Gothic cathedrals, like Strasbourg Cathedral, whose amazing spire you now see at left. I love having a career in art history because this field allows me to draw on my interest not only in the visual arts, but in the history of science and mathematics, as I'll describe in the coming videos. In particular, I'll talk about how my professional biography has allowed me to draw on my interest in the mathematical objects called fractals, of which you see an example here, and how my childhood interest in dinosaurs, like Tyrannosaurus rex here, has actually brought me an evolutionary perspective that allows me to better understand the history of art. So in the coming videos, I'll talk about my intellectual biography, but I'll also talk about my three main book projects and how those allow me to bring my research into the classroom at the University of Iowa. I'll begin by talking about my first book, Great Spires, whose cover you see here, where I investigate the meaning and social importance of great spire projects in the late Middle Ages. And I'll go on then to talk about how this actually allows my students to think about urbanism and architecture in new ways. So when they go to a University of Iowa football game, they realize what the urban presence of these large structures in the landscape may be. My second book project here, The Geometry of Creation, which was just published in 2011, concerns the geometrical bases of Gothic design as seen in Gothic blueprints, you might say, or medieval design drawings. And I'll talk in the video, as I talk in the book, about how the design principles of Gothic are actually very close to some of these recursive, form-generative processes like we see in these mathematical objects called fractals, like we see there. As a simpler example of this process, which I'll explain further later, we can see this famous snowflake diagram where if you start with a single equilateral triangle and add little triangles to it, and then little triangles to those, and little triangles to those, we eventually get to a very complex final form, but through a series of very simple steps. That's the same kind of process that the Gothic builders went through, although they were not mathematicians, they were really just playing with their compasses and their rulers. I'll talk about then how very different that process of design was in the Gothic era than we see in the Renaissance, with this diagram on the left by Francesco di Giorgio showing a human body as the proportion-giving figure for columns. These are two very different ways of thinking about architectural order that confronted each other side by side for over a century, as we can see in illustrations like this one from a 15th century book of hours. So my third book project looks at this confrontation between these two different stylistic modes, and how it happened that the Renaissance mode eventually won out over the Gothic mode, which is the one that I actually like better. And I will try to argue then that this kind of conflict between these two modes and the way that the one mode wins over the other can help students to think about images in the modern world, including in political propaganda and advertising, like we see here with George W. Bush or Obama. So, in the coming videos, I'll try to talk about how I've come to this place in the study of Gothic architecture and how I bring that into the classroom. In the next video, I'll begin by talking a little bit about my intellectual biography.